Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto was the son of the Greek gods? Part -8. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. Oh, crap, this is worse than the orphanage back home. Well that's bad, muttered Kushina. Or not. Kushina sighed and smiled while thinking, that's a relief. He thought as he looked at them all. They were all in good spirits. Yup, much better than the orphanage back there, smiled Kushina. He did notice that when they saw Chiron, they stood and bowed to the man. Yet another sign that they guy was important. Well, he does train the kids, said Hermes. First was the immortality and not the show of respect. Well, yeah, someone who can kick your butt 6 ways to Sunday. I would honestly try to get him on your good side, said Hermes. The demigods nodded their head. He is also in charge of punishment, so he is pretty high position in my book, said Hermes. The gods sighed and thought, same old Hermes. Well, then, Chiron said. Good luck, Percy. I'll see you at dinner. Food, Ed Apollo. Shut up Apollo, hissed out Artemis. Aw little sis, you are no fun, pouted Apollo. Don't call me little sis because I am older than you, said Artemis. Enough you two, you can settle this later, shouted Zeus. All he heard was, yes father, and he nodded his head then commanded Selena to start reading. He then galloped away toward the archery range. Like a little pony, sneered Ares. Ares, I didn't know you loved little ponies, laughed Kushina. Everyone in the throne room started to laugh at the misfortune of the war go. Shut up redhead, glared Ares. As everyone calmed down, Selena started to read once more. Turning back to the group behind them, they noticed that all the kids were sizing up the two of them. Just like any other school, smiled Percy. They would also be judging you up to see if you would be their friends or enemies, said Annabeth. You're right, wise girl, like always, blushed Percy. Annabeth blushed but looked the other way. Athena glared at the sea spawn for making her daughter blush. While Aphrodite squealed at the cute couple. Great. Now they needed to make a good impression. With Percy there, yeah right, joked Nico and Talia. Percy did the mature thing to do and stick his tongue out and pouted. So naturally Percy tripped coming in the door and made a total fool of himself. Just like always, laughed Talia, Nico, and Annabeth. Percy pouted while smiling at his cousins and Annabeth. There were some snickers from the campers, but none of them said anything. Percy making a fool of himself is always funny to watch, laughed Talia. I know right, remarked Thals. Kushina smiled at the girls and thought, they never change. Naruto just walked in nonchalantly, which seemed to calm Percy down a bit. Wait, can you read that again please? Shouted out Annabeth. Everyone laughed while Percy blushed and then glared mocking at Annabeth. Annabeth announced, Percy Jackson, Naruto Uzumaki, meet Cabin 11. Hi Cabin 11, waved Apollo. The other gods looked at Apollo with raised eyebrows before sighing. Artemis wanted to bang her head against something hard or even better Apollo's head to relieve herself of Apollo's stupid antics. Regular or undetermined? Somebody asked. Undetermined because he is my son, smiled Poseidon. Guessing is how we just got here. I would say undetermined. At least someone is smarter than Kelp head over here, smiled Talia. Now Talia, you know even a fish is smarter than seaweed brain, said Annabeth. Hey, that was a secret and that fish was a genius, pouted Percy while a faint dusting on pick appeared on his cheeks. Everyone laughed at a blushing Percy. Athena smiled at her daughter, proud at the embarrassment of the sea spawn. Naruto deadpanned and there was a groan of annoyance from everyone in the cabin. Maybe we should claim all our kids so Hermes has less occupancies in his cabin, said Apollo. Artemis's eyes widened and shuddered out. Apollo, that sentence was intelligence and I can't believe it came out of your mouth of all people. Aw little sis, that is the sweetest thing you have said to me today, grinned Apollo. Artemis hissed out, don't get used to it Apollo. A guy who was a little older than the rest came forward. Luke, thought Annabeth and Talia. Percy frowned but said nothing, and Nico had an emotionless face on. Thals just bowed her head and Kushina smiled. Now, campers. That's what we're here for. Welcome, Percy, Naruto. Yeah, and then backstab me in the back later that year, thought Percy. You can have that spot on the floor, right over there. It is pretty big, so the two of you will fit for now. I wonder if Naruto can just sleep in the trees or something because he is a ninja badass, said Apollo. Artemis grinded her teeth together, said, Apollo, so help me. To be as awesome as me, I know, and touched sis, grinned Apollo. No, you idiot, screamed Artemis. The guy was about 19, and he looked pretty cool. He is not cool at all, said Percy. Annabeth looked down in sadness, thinking about her brother figure. He was tall and muscular, with short cropped hair and a friendly smile. That was all just a trick, thought Thals, thinking about the time when Percy got hurt. He wore an orange tank top, cutoffs, sandals, and a leather necklace with 5 different colored clay beads. Percy smiled and rubbed his beads together. Annabeth smiled and looked down at her beads, but more importantly the green trident. Talia had a knowing grin splashed on her face, and Nico smirked. The only thing unsettling about his appearance was a thick white scar that ran from just beneath his right eye to his jaw. Foreboding, thought the occupants in the room. Like an old knife slash. Oh ho, now this guy seems like fighter. He was, thought Annabeth and Talia. Naruto smirked at the thought. This place was awesome. Yes, camp is awesome, thought all the demigods in the throne room with smiles on their faces. This is Luke, Annabeth said, and her voice sounded different somehow. Percy frowned but said nothing while Annabeth blushed. Talia looked at her little sister figure and sighed. They looked at her and it looked like she just got out of a blush. Aphrodite smiled and thought, ah, a love triangle, but Percy is going to have Annabeth in the end. Athena looked suspicious at Aphrodite and made a silent vow that if she hurts Annabeth she would have made an enemy out of her. Naruto raised an eyebrow. It seemed that she was into old guys. Ah, I am so proud of my grandson, squealed Aphrodite. Everyone in the room covered their ears and thought, why us? After Apollo healed everyone's hearing, Zeus commanded Selena to start reading once more. He smirked. He could tease her later. Aphrodite sniffed and wiped her eyes because she was so proud of her grandson. His expression hardened when she them looking, but for Naruto, he already had some pranking material. Yes, a fellow prankster, Hermes cried with joy. He's your counselor for now. For a couple of days at least, began Percy. Nico grinned while Talia nodded her head. For now? Percy asked. Yes, for now, see Spawn, growled Athena. Athena, growled out Poseidon. You're undetermined. That means you father or mother has not claimed, began Apollo. Percy and the other demigods shouted out, we know that. Oh, grinned Apollo. Artemis sighed and muttered, idiot. All the females in the room nodded their heads in agreement. Apollo pouted and then grinned and began, hey little sis. Artemis hissed out, don't call me that. Apollo. Ah, come on sis, complained Apollo. Luke explained patiently. They don't know what cabin to put you in, so you're here. Cabin 11 takes all newcomers, all visitors. Most became traitors, muttered Percy and Annabeth. Naturally, we would. Hermes, our patron, is the god of travelers. Also of thieves, cheered Apollo and Hermes. Hey, the god of thieves, now that is a guy that sounds fun. Naruto said. See, Naruto agrees with us, smiled Apollo. Thals muttered, well yeah, because he is a shinobi. Kushina smiled and said, are you trying to corrupt my son, Hermes, Apollo? No, exclaimed the two sweating gods. Artemis smiled at Kushina and wished she was a hunter. Getting a few chuckles from the other campers. He is so popular, I am going to have fun with his love life, smiled Aphrodite. Kushina sighed at the antics of her mother before focusing back to the book. Selena started again. He decided to give back Luke's wallet. Here you go, man. Shinobi skills, roared Hermes with stars in his eyes. The gods smiled at the messenger god's reaction. Wah, Luke said a little surprised. How and when? Just a moment ago most likely, smiled Thals. Oh, just now and I am a ninja, I am do that easily. Naruto said, getting a few shocked looks. Just like when we first got introduced to this book, said the gods and demigods in the room. Anyway, Percy interrupted, already used to Naruto's antics. How long are we going to be here? Who knows, smiled Hermes, just dreaming about if he and Naruto teamed up. Everyone suddenly got a shivered in fear and got a hand over their money or wallet. Good question, Luke said. Until you're determined. Makes sense, said Demeter, but then she added, but it would make more sense if they had cereal. Hades' eyes twitched and shouted out, Woman, will you stop with the cereal? Demeter looked at her precious daughter for support, but Persephone nodded her head, agreeing with her husband. Demeter scowled and hissed out, So you have turned my daughter on me, Hades. Persephone butted in and said, No, mother, your rants about cereal can be annoying. Demeter was about to yell at Hades for have a bad influence on her daughter, when Zeus slammed his master bolt on the throne room floor to signal for everyone to shut up. The room became silent and Zeus said, Silence. He turned his head to Selena. Then said, To start reading now. She nodded her head and began by, How long will that take? Typical male response, hissed out Zoe. Artemis smiled at her old friend, lieutenant of the Hunters of Artemis. The campers all laughed. Typical, thought the Hunters and Artemis. I am getting the feeling that take a long time. Naruto's sweat dropped. What do we got to do? Prove ourselves. Pretty much, said the demigods in the room. Come on, Annabeth told me. I'll show you the volleyball court. But he has already seen those, said Apollo and Hermes. I've already seen it, Percy replied. Annabeth wants you to come with her so you won't embarrass yourself further, said Aphrodite. Everyone looked at the love goddess with gaping mouths because she actually said something intelligent. Come on. She grabbed his wrist and dragged him outside. Percy could hear the kids of cabin laughing. Most likely, if I know my children right, said Hermes. 11 laughing behind him. I knew it, grinned Hermes. No one doubted you, said Athena. Naruto shook his head. This girl was odd, but she seemed fun to him. He them chuckled to himself. Could Percy already have a girlfriend and already be whipped? See, my grandson can see the love between them, grinned Aphrodite. Nah, he just got here after all. True love doesn't matter, sighed Aphrodite. When we were a few feet away, Annabeth said, Jackson, you have to do better than that. Oh, Annabeth, it is Jackson. Then what happened to Seaweed Brain? Joked Talia and Nico. Annabeth blushed but said nothing. What? Zoe scowled and said, All men are clueless. All the females nodded their heads, agreeing with the huntress. She rolled her eyes and mumbled under her breath, I can't believe I thought you were the one. Oh, the one, Annie, Annabeth, teased Talia and Nico. Shut up, you two, shuddered a blushing Annabeth. What's your problem? Naruto grimaced as he heard the anger in his friend's voice. All I know is, I kill some bull guy and that was with the help of Naruto. Of course, whispered Thals. We just kill some odd bull freak. Percy, nice name, smirked Thals. Don't talk like that, Annabeth told him. You know how many kids at this camp wish they'd had your chance. A lot, muttered the gods and goddesses. To get killed? Percy asked with a confused look. To get respect and knowledge of your existence to your godly parent, said Athena. Wow, owl head, that was deep, laughed Poseidon. Shut up, kelp face, said Athena. To fight the Minotaur. What do you think we train for? The girl yelled. Annabeth, to get my attention you don't have to put your life at danger, said Athena. I know, mother, muttered Annabeth. Then you guy must train your asses off here. The Minotaur from those old stories was a pain in the to kill. I had to weaken with a Rasengan. Naruto complained. Bet Annabeth will ask a question, said Nico. I am not taking that fixed bet, said Thals and Talia. A what? Annabeth asked. Naruto just sighed as he created a swirling energy that disappeared after a few seconds, but those watching them had seen it and wondered what it could do. Magic, said Apollo. Artemis banged her head on her throne and screamed out, "Idiot," over and over again. Wait, Theseus killed him in the labyrinth. So, Percy trailed off. In other words, it was killed but not gone, smiled Annabeth looking at Percy. Percy blushed and shuddered out, "I know that now, wise girl." Aphrodite sighed and thought, "Ah, young love. Monsters don't die, Percy. They can be killed, but they don't die." "Annie, why are you repeating yourself?" joked Talia. "Shut up, Talia," said Annabeth. "Oh, thanks. That clears it up." "It does," said Apollo. "They don't have souls, like you and me. You can dispel them for a while, maybe even for a whole lifetime if you're lucky. But they are primal forces. Chiron calls them archetypes. Eventually, they reform. That's the bad thing about monsters," said all the demigods. "Oh, that's nice," Naruto said as he smacked his head. "It is, isn't it?" questioned Apollo. "Shut up, Apollo," hissed out Artemis. "You mean if we killed one, accidentally, with a sword?" "Yup," said Nico and Talia. I mean, your math teacher." "That's right. She's still out there. You just made her very, very mad." Annabeth informed him. "She is still mad at you for that," informed Nico. "Thanks for the update, Nico," said Percy. "How did you know about Mrs. Dodds?" "I wonder how?" questioned Annabeth with a smile on her face. "You talk in your sleep." Everyone laughed at Percy, who had a blushing on his face. "You almost called her something. A fury. They're Hades, torturers, right?" Naruto asked while Percy nodded. "Names have power," said Annabeth. "We know, wise girl," said Percy. Annabeth glanced nervously at the ground, as if she expected it to open up and swallow her. Everyone looked at Hades and he shrugged his shoulders, then said, "It was one time. You shouldn't call them by name, even here. We call them the kindly ones, if we have to speak of them at all." "True," muttered the demigods. "Man, you guys take fear to the extreme. Sure, she was creepy, but, come on. They can't be that bad." Naruto replied. Annabeth just gave him a look. Like everyone in the throne room looked at the book. "Fun. Look, is there anything we can say without it thundering?" Percy whined. That even sounded sad to him. "Wow, you actually admits it," teased Nico, Talia, and Annabeth. "Why do I have to stay in cabin 11, anyway? Why is everybody so crowded together? There are plenty of empty bunks right over there," he said, pointing to a few other cabins. "Some gods and or goddesses are territory," said Poseidon. "You don't just choose a cabin, Percy. It depends on who your parents are. Or, your parent," Annabeth informed him. He seemed to get it, maybe. "In other words, no," said Annabeth. "Hey," pouted Percy. "My mom is Sally Jackson," he said. "She works at the candy store in Grand Central Station." "Best mom ever," shouted Percy. Nico and Talia nodded their heads in agreement. "At least, she used to." "Sally," thought Poseidon. Percy, I think she means your dad." Naruto commented. "Good job, Naruto," fake cheered Thals, and Kushina just laughed. "But he's dead. I never knew him," Percy said. "Actually, he never dies to begin with, so impossible," said Percy. "Wow, kelp head, big words," teased Talia. Annabeth sighed. Clearly, she'd had this conversation before with other kids. "Your father's not dead, Percy." "See, wise girl agrees with me," said Percy. "Oh no, it is the end of the world if Annabeth agrees with him," said Talia in a mocked horror-filled voice. "I am getting the feeling that he is a god, right?" Naruto deadpanned. "Naruto is right," smiled Thals. "What?" Percy said, surprised. "Typical seaweed brain answer," teased Annabeth. "How else would you be allowed here?" Naruto shrugged. "Naruto has a good point, must have gotten it from his mother's side," said Artemis. "What about you?" Percy pointed to Naruto. "Child of Athena," smiled Percy. "Oh, I am not sure, but whoever my dad was, he said to just wait until the right time. Besides, you know that I am an orphan, so I am used to waiting around like this." "My poor baby." Hades, sniffed Kushina. "Oh, right," Percy said, a little embarrassed. "But, how do I know I am a demigod as they are called?" Here comes Annabeth with the answers, teased Talia. Usually demigods are diagnosed with dyslexia and probably ADHD, too. Annabeth said. Common but not always, said Athena. Dyslexia is where you mix up word and stuff, right? Percy asked. Very smart Perse, joked Nico. Hey, you think you got it bad, what about me? I know 3 languages now. Naruto said. English, Japanese, and now this Greek stuff. Wow, he is talented, said Annabeth with her eyes shining. Everyone just rolled their eyes at the daughter of Athena. So, you could read at the museum as well. Well, of course he can because he is a demigod after all, said Hades. Yep, Naruto said. Always the positive one around, smiled Thals. Okay, so how does ADHD help? Battle reflexes, cheered Ares. Simple, they are your battle reflexes. Annabeth stated. It is a good thing you had that because if you didn't, you would not have survived the Minotaur, much less eaten the ambrosia and nectar. Food and drink of the gods, drooled Apollo. Artemis and her hunters scowled and hissed out, men. Huh, another typical response of Percy Jackson, teased Annabeth, Nico, and Talia. Percy, that stuff you drank that made you feel better. That's one way of describing it, said Hermes. Naruto said. For me, that stuff tasted like Ichiraku's ramen. Kushina blushed and had a dreamy look in her eyes, then Ed, He had anime tears in his eyes, making Percy chuckle to himself. His friend had the weirdest tastes. Hey, his tastes aren't weird, screeched Kushina with an anger look on her face. My mom's cookies, Percy said sadly. That does sound good, said Nico while Percy just nodded his head. Well, those are the signs, you two are defiantly demigods. Not really, there have been one mortal cases where they had no godly blood at all, said Athena. I didn't know that, said Annabeth while everyone in the room nodded their heads in agreement. Annabeth said, but before she could say anything else, she was interrupted by someone very familiar to her and Naruto. Oh my gosh, a new person, squealed Aphrodite. Well, a newbie, Clarice, said Percy and Annabeth, who both blushed but said nothing. A husky voice said. Percy looked over to the big girl he saw in the Ares cabin, come sauntering toward them. Yup, defiantly Clarice, said Percy. She had 3 other girls behind her. Go kids go, roared Ares, who was fist pumping the air. All big and ugly and mean looking like her, all wearing camo jackets. Of course that is the only stylish thing to go, screamed Ares. He noticed that she was talking to him, but also that she was stealing glances at his blonde-haired friend. Oh my god's a love triangle, screeched out Aphrodite. Everyone had to duck in over their ears just to not be deaf. Oh no. Why does he attract all the tough girls? First it was Nancy Bobofit and now this girl. I feel sorry for him, muttered Percy while Annabeth just nodded her head. Clarice, Annabeth sighed, also noticing the looks. Why don't you go polish your spear or something? Nice comeback, yawned Kushina, who didn't even look interested. Sure, Miss Princess, the big girl said. So I can run you through with it Friday night. Finally some action, cheered Ares while Aphrodite threw a shoe at him and shouted out, shut up you pig. Hephaestus smiled and finally looked happy for once. Ares Korakas, Annabeth said, which was Greek for, go to the crows. Annabeth language, said Athena. Though the boys had a feeling it was a worse curse than it sounded. You don't stand a chance. Pretty much, said Apollo and Athena, who looked a little nervous. We'll pulverize you, Clarice said. He then looked at Naruto and had a slight pink tint to her cheeks. I love myself because I am making my grandson popular, sighed Aphrodite with a smile on her face. Hey Naruto, who is the runt with you? Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon, said Nico. Oh, this is my friend Percy Jackson. Percy Jackson, meet Clarice, smiled Annabeth. No, yelled out Percy. Yes, and I am sure Naruto already knows this, but this is Clarice, daughter of Ares, god of war. Annabeth mumbled, finding it odd that Clarice could be in love. But now if you think about it, love goes with war, said Annabeth. Not anymore, said Percy. Right, not anymore, smiled Annabeth. The war god, Percy said with both eyebrows raised. No, the god of peace, of course, laughed Athena. Clarice sneered and held up Percy by the collar. You got a problem with that? Here comes Percy's famous special remarks that get him into trouble, said Annabeth, Nico, and Talia. No, Percy said, recovering his wits. It explains the bad smell. What did you say, punk? Bellowed out Ares. Aphrodite hissed out, shut up, Ares. Naruto smacked his head and mumbled something about his friend getting a spine at the worst times. It's a gift, smiled Percy. No, it's being dumb, said Annabeth. Hey, cried out Percy while Annabeth just smiled. Clarice growled. We got an initiation ceremony for newbies, Prissy. Head in the toilet, sang Percy. Percy. That's my name, grinned Percy. Whatever. Come on, I'll show you. Clarice said as he dragged the boy to the bathrooms. Here comes the flood, sang Percy with a smile on his face. Clarice. Annabeth tried to say. Ah, Annabeth cares, sighed Aphrodite. Stay out of it, wise girl. Perseus Jackson, you stole your nickname from Clarice, shouted all the demigods. Clarice growled as she and the others walked away. It is Percy's fight, so he must fight it, said Thals. Naruto. Annabeth rounded on her fellow blonde. You have to help him. No, he doesn't, said Thals. I guess you're right, blushed Annabeth. Sighing, Naruto replied, I know I should, but I can't be the one to fight all his battles. That's right, punk, nodded Ares. He then grabbed the horn Percy dropped. They walked to the door while saying this, and he was sure Percy heard him. Let's see if you can regain some of that strength. So he is being observant, said Athena. Annabeth and Naruto watched at the door as Clarice and her friends mocked Percy. Bad move, grinned Nico and Talia. As they began to push Percy's head toward the toilet, Naruto felt that power if felt back at the museum. Oh, this is going to be messy for them. Everyone besides Ares knew what was going to happen laughed. Ares just looked confused for a bit until realization crashed onto him like a train. Huh? Annabeth asked. Then, one of the toilets shot out water at Clarice. No, screamed out Ares. And as her friends tried to help her, the other toilets exploded. Poseidon bellowed in laughter and Percy just grinned. Blasting water all over the place and on Annabeth and Naruto. Ew, gross, how can you have that water in your hair? Screeched Aphrodite. Annabeth just recoiled and said, with great self-control, but you're right, it was gross. Didn't expect that, he said, spitting out water. Go Naruto, use your super awesome like myself powers to dry off, roared Apollo. Artemis just sighed and shook her head. Percy walked over to them with a shocked expression. Of course, grinned Percy. Annabeth just glared at Percy and made him back away. But he was laughing in the inside at how funny the two looked. Perseus Jackson, come here, screamed an enraged Annabeth. Annabeth said, how did you? With the sea's power, grinned Poseidon. I don't know. Percy shrugged. Another typical answer of our famous Percy Jackson, fake cheered Nico while Talia just laughed. Well, Percy, you just gave the name Water Boy a whole new meaning. Naruto said, which actually got a laugh from Annabeth. He is as popular with the ladies as me, grinned Apollo. Artemis just groaned and said, then hopeful he won't be. They walked to the door. Outside, Clarice and her friends were sprawled in the mud, and a bunch of other campers had gathered around to gawk. Good times, thought Percy with a smile on his face. Clarice's hair was flattened across her face. Her camouflage jacket was sopping and she smelled like sewage. Annabeth laughed thinking about what happened to her and Clarice. She gave me a look of absolute hatred. Yup, just like old times, said Percy. You are dead, new boy. You are totally dead. No, Percy, you can't be dead because then I would have to explain to your father and mother about your death. They would kill me, complained Nico. While Talia just nodded her head. However, it was quickly gone because Naruto had decided to help out, but not in the way anyone expected. He created a shadow clone to help them out. I want to learn how to make these shadow clones of his, said Athena and Annabeth. They both smiled at one another and everyone else thought, like mother like daughter. Wind style. Great breakthrough. Wow, another element, thought the gods and goddesses. All the water and mud that was on them was blown away and into the nearby forest. Ninja badass, shouted out Hermes and Apollo. The clone then disappeared. As we were saying ninja badass, shouted the two male gods. Artemis stood up from her throne and made her way to where Apollo was. She then hid up and shouted, shut up Apollo. Though, the damage had been already done. Everyone was gawking at Naruto now. What's new? Said Thales. He walked over to Clarice and helped her up. Ah, such a gentleman, squealed Aphrodite. Kushina and Thales smiled at her son and wondered when he would get here or if he would get here. Don't be too hard on him next time. He smirked and then winked. Oh my god, he is a natural born ladies man, grinned Hades. He then sunshined back to Percy and Annabeth, leaving more shocked people to look at him. Just like the reactions of either mortals find out we are gods or find out that we can teleport, said the gods and goddesses. He never saw the full-blown blush on her face. Of course, because that would be too easy, grinned Aphrodite. Show off. Percy smirked. Of course he is, but at least he isn't a drama queen, said Poseidon and Hades. Zeus just looked enraged but said nothing. Oh, I do over to it, but I could not help it. Just like a cheating husband I know, that can't help keeping it in his pants, hissed out Hera. Zeus looked anywhere else besides Hera. But if you looked closely you could see Hera had a hurt expression on her cold exterior. Naruto shrugged. He then noticed Annabeth looking from Percy to Naruto. What are you thinking? I want you on my team for capture the flag, said Annabeth. I'm thinking, she said, that I want the two of you on my team for capture the flag. Selena finally sighed and shouted out, finally I am done with the chapter. Zeus rose from his throne and boomed out, we will have end for the time being. Zeus stood up from his throne and looked at everyone in the throne room. Before sighing and said, all right, if everyone wants to go to camp, fine, go. Artemis teleported to the hunter's camp, while the other gods and goddesses went to camp for some quality time with their children. Hunter's camp. There was a silver light flashed into the middle of camp and a group of young females gathered. As soon as the flash subsided, there stood Artemis in all her glory, shining like a beacon of light from the moon's beam of light. The group of girls just bowed and said, "Am I lady?" Artemis waved off and said, "At ease." The group of girls relaxed and wondered what their lady wants of them. Artemis closed her eyes thinking how her hunters wouldn't like this. But it had to be done. She began, "Hunters, we are going to camp Half-Blood for the time being because I have to be up on Olympus for a while." There were many growls and grumbling at this. Artemis sighed but gave the command to move out, and reluctantly they did. After the packing was done, the hunters came around Artemis so she can transport them to camp. Artemis glowed a silvery light and vanished, but with it so did the hunters. The forest was deserted and no one would have thought that it was inhabited by a group of young girls who vanished with their goddess. Camp Half-Blood. The campers sat enjoying their lunch when suddenly there was 16 flashes of light. When the flash subsided, there was 16 adults and a couple of teenagers. Little Annabeth looked at the group and two girls in particular. The two girls had black hair and freckles with electric blue eyes. She stood up and shouted out, "Talia." Luke stood up looking confused but hopeful. Little Annabeth charged at the two girls, which they hugged Annabeth. Annabeth then immediately asked them what happened and how they are alive. Thales and Talia both smiled at Annabeth. Luke slowly walked up to the two girls and shuddered out, "T Talia." Talia looked at Luke with an unreadable expression on her face while Thales just frowned but said nothing. Luke looked at Talia and froze because she was in a hunter's uniform with the lieutenant. But then his gaze went to Thales and grinned. Before Luke could comment, Zeus boomed out, "Campers, we are here for Hermes to expand his cabin and our guests are here to see camp." Out of the group of teenagers, a blonde-haired girl with gray eyes came forward. The Athena cabin straightened up because she is their sister. She smiled and said, I am Annabeth Chase, daughter of Athena. Little Annabeth looked shocked while Luke's eyes brightened while thinking, so we are all together again just like old times. Thales walked up and said, Talia Grace, daughter of Zeus, and just call me Thales. Nico's shadow traveled from where he was at and said, Nico D'Angelo, son of Hades. Some of the campers backed away cautiously while Nico just shrugged it off because he was kind of used to it by now. The campers were whispering to each other because 2 out of the big 3 were here. Percy looked uncomfortable but said, Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon. As soon as the identity of Percy was mentioned, the camp was buzzing with excitement because all 3 of the big 3 children were here. Talia smirked and said, Talia, daughter of Zeus and lieutenant of Artemis. The majority of the campers looked a little confused because there was 2 Talias. Thales just said, just leave it alone because you will just confuse yourself more. Many nodded their heads in agreement and left it, but only a couple of campers had looks that demanded answers later. They were Luke, little Annabeth, but also Chiron. Kushina laughed but walked up to the line of demigods. The female campers just stood transfixed, admiring at her beauty, and all the males at camp just drooled. Kushina smiled and said, Kushina Uzumaki, daughter of Aphrodite and second wife to Hades. The campers looked shocked and some backed away while the Aphrodite campers looked at Kushina and nodded their heads because they approved Kushina's beauty. Kushina smiled at her sisters and brothers but then turned to the campers, her face became emotionless. Just then a silver flash of light broke everyone out of their stupor. But when the light dimmed, it showed Artemis and her hunters. Chiron bowed once again and the campers whispered excitingly to one another. Chiron said, Campers capture the flag is tonight, so it is campers versus hunters. Zeus said to the other gods and goddesses that they could interact with all their children for rest of the day. They were also claim all of their children to the Hermes cabin. The campers who lived in the cabin looked hopeful and excited for more room or being claimed. So the gods and goddesses snapped their fingers. The results were dramatically, to say the least. About 50% of the campers in the Hermes cabin was claimed. The siblings of the newly claimed campers patted their backs and went to pack up their stuff, then head to their new cabins. Then he told Hermes to create a new cabin for his children and the rest of the minor gods and goddesses' children. Thales was walking with little Annabeth, telling her about her life as a tree. Little Annabeth wanted to know what released her. But Thales remained silent because she didn't want to anything about her dimension because she knew it was going to be different because no Naruto. Means they never got together, so why bother saying it when it won't happen? Little Annabeth just smiled because she finally got her big sister back in Luke, so all her family was here. Luke then asked about if Annabeth and Percy were close. I said, yes, or they will be, and left it at that. Luke then looked down but became silent. I walked with them for a couple hours. I finally made my way to Zeus' cabin. I opened it slowly and went inside and flopped down on my bed. Or at least what my bed would be. I yawned and closed my eyes for a short nap. Talia was with the hunters talking about the hunt in the future, like how many girls they were. But not the deaths like Zoe or the other hunters she didn't know even existed until now. Luke sat some distance away from the 2 Talias thinking about the future and how it is going to change for the better because Talia is out of her tree and there are less campers in Hermes now. With Annabeth and Percy. Percy was at the beach with his best friend who happens to be a girl. Annabeth smiled and unconsciously moved closer to the one she likes, then grasped Percy's hand to hers. Percy gasped and thought, I can't believe I am holding Annabeth's hand. Annabeth just said, shut up seaweed brain and just enjoy the sunset with me. Percy just blushed but nodded his head, but Annabeth couldn't see the small grin on his face. Annabeth and Percy glaze was now on the sunset that showed shades of pink and golden lights of the last rays of sunlight. Meanwhile, Aphrodite suddenly sighed because she could feel the budding romance of young love. Hephaestus smiled warmly at his wife and held her closer to him. Aphrodite smiled and thought, I should have broken up with Ares a long time ago. Aphrodite leaned into her husband's embrace and put her head on her husband's shoulders. while they enjoyed the romantic sunset. When night came, capture the flag was tonight because the hunters' arrival at camp. The hunters grinned but the campers groaned and muttered curses under their breath. As the day went, sunset made its way known. The start of capture the flag was about to beginning. The future campers like Percy, Talia, Thals, Selena and Nico wanted to play the game. But only Annabeth wanted to watch and better improve her strategy next time the hunters came to visit. But in the end she joined Percy and the rest of them in capture the flag. Talia joined the hunters' side because she wanted to get to know her sisters like Zoe and some of the hunters who passed before Talia joined the hunters. The campers had an agreement to put the flag on top Zeus' fist. Before the game started, Kashina thought it would be wise to put down seals to fix the landscape and absorb excess energy to not cause too much damage to the area where the demigods live. The sun was setting when capture the flag began. The game lasted for hours, neither side losing too much ground. The skies were pitch black with thunder booming and rain hitting everywhere. The occasional lightning flashes could be seen and hit the campers or hunters, to stun them so they couldn't move for the rest of the game or leave them unconsensus. Thals raised up her hand and shouted out, "Let the heavens roar." Lightning bolts shot up from her hands into the clouds above her. The storm became more destructive and bulliate. Soon the only noise was the pounding of rain and thunder, with flashes of lightning above the tree tops. While the hunters didn't lose focus or determination of their objective to the campers, flag and win the game for the 55th game in a row. Talia led the distraction group while Zoe captured the flag. Talia was surrounded by campers. She smiled, then brought out her trusty shield and spear. She raised her spear and willed a bolt of lightning to hit the spear. She then pointed the tip to the group of campers and a bolt of lightning shot towards the campers. The hunters smiled at their future sister and Talia just grinned before making her way to the flag. Talia could see Luke. Talia grinned and thought, "Perfect," before she charging at him with a determined look in her electric blue eyes. So Talia rushed her unexpected target with Thals. Meanwhile, Thals grinned because she would be facing off against Zoe again in capture the flag because she was one of the fastest hunters for one thing. The other was she had the most experience, second to none to Artemis herself. The last couple of reasons why Zoe was coming to get the flag from the campers was that she also had the most skills out of all the hunters. She was also just really good at taking control over the situation like herself. So it is only fitting for Zoe to get it like she always did. Thals meanwhile formed a cross seal, then started to concentrate it on her chakra to make excellent justice Naruto showed her. She muttered, "Raiden Cage Bunshin," or, "Lightning Release Shadow Clone." A couple clones suddenly came into existence beside her. The original Thals just said, "You know what to do." The clones just nodded her head and rushed to get the hunter's flag. Meanwhile, Thals just stood there on top of Zeus' fist, look over the clearing. All she had to do was wait for Zoe to arrive. Zoe was surprised that the campers were fighting the hunters at an equal footing. The campers were also more organized with their plans, like they knew what she was going to do. She gasped and thought, the campers from the future, of course, it was so obvious now. Zoe mentally slapped herself and thought, I got to get the flag and fast. Zoe was just coming out of the woods at an incredible rate of speed. Thals grinned when she saw the bushes move. A few moments later referred a stunned Zoe Nightshade. Thals pulled out a sword sheath. Now Zoe was confused, but a few moments later her eyes showed amazement and surprise. Because Thals focused her lightning powers and activated the lightning blade that the Raijin no Ken, sword of the thunder god, possessed. Zoe backed away slowly while eyeing up the Raijin no Ken, wondering how much damage the electric sword could do. Thals smirked and charged at the unexpected hunter. In response to the incoming blur, Zoe raised her silver blades in a defensive stance. When the two blades collided, an electric current surrounded Zoe. The discharge from Raijin no Ken pushed Zoe back into hitting a tree. Zoe huffed but got back up to face the challenge before her. Meanwhile, with the gods and goddesses, Zeus and the other gods looked on in shock at what his alternative daughter did. Because she had a clone of herself made out of lightning. Zeus wondered how she did it and thought, I am proud of her, but she could have a better boyfriend, or better yet no boyfriend at all. Zeus then narrowed his eyes and thought, hopeful he won't break my daughter's heart or else he will suffer the consequences. Back to the scene of the fight, Thales pulled out a sword sheath and suddenly a lightning blade came out. The gods and goddesses breathed a gasp at the beauty of it and also the power behind the creation, but also the deadly destruction a lightning blade could cause. Zeus then thought that the weapon are very suiting for his children. He also wanted to see how much power it could generate and what else it could do. Hephaestus had a gleam of wonder in his eyes when he looked at the blade and made a side note to ask how it was made. Athena was jumping up and down because she finally found a weapon that is in the alternative dimension. She also had stars in her eyes with a look of longing in them because she wanted to know how the blade works too. Apollo whistled and shouted out, that weapon looks so cool. All the gods just nodded their heads while the females also nodded their heads in agreement slowly. But the goddesses and Kushina had small smiles on their faces. Ares was crackling with excitement because he were going to witness a good fight in his option. He also wanted to know how mortals made the weapon because gods above he wanted one too. Artemis just smiled at her alternative future hunter. She also wanted to compare the two. Artemis also wanted to see the weapon in action and then wondered how mortals could create such weapons. But also wondered if there are other amazing weapons. Kushina smiled at her son's very first girlfriend. Thales and Zoe. Meanwhile, back at the fight between Thales and Zoe. Zoe shouted out, where did thee get that blade? Thales smirked and said, you not the Zoe, and I got it from my boyfriend who fixed it. Zoe looked shocked at what Thales said because she thought Hephaestus would make such a beautiful but deadly weapon. Zoe looked up at Thales and then charged her, but you could see Zoe's determination to win. The fight was like a spar because Thales knew all of Zoe's moves. But wanted to judge this Zoe's skills to her Zoe's. Zoe wanted to curse at the daughter of Zeus because Thales knew all her tricks and her fighting style. Zoe wondered how that was possible, but realization came to her because she determined that her alternative self either showed or fought against the demigod a lot. The reason was that Thales knew where some of her weak spots in her style and blocked or dodged every hit Zoe threw at her. Zoe had one thought going through her head, she had to take Thales out as soon as possible. For the game was at stake, was at risk for every second battling. Zoe thrusted her hunting knives in a graceful arc but was blocked by the Raijin no Ken. As soon as the blades touched each other there were small sparks flying around them. For a few minutes the two girls were trading blows for blows. Zoe was shocked that Thales was standing up to her for this long. Zoe cursed saying, "Thou art good and would be a good hunter if thee would not love boys." Thales smiled and gave a small laugh, while thinking, if only you knew Zoe, if only you knew. Thales said, "No thanks Nightshade, I am perfectly happy with him, thank you very much." Zoe sighed but the sounds of swords clashing could be heard throughout the forest. Thales smiled at Zoe for a moment. Zoe's expression became sour because she thought that Thales was not taking her seriously, so strikes became more powerful but to no avail. Thales just kept on blocking the strikes which made Zoe even angrier. Zoe was getting really frustrated with the daughter of Zeus. For one, that damnable smirk on her face, and two, she kept on dodging or blocking all her attacks with ease. Zoe shrieked out, "Thou art so infuriating," but kept on the offensive. Thales just smirked and raised Raijin no Ken, and suddenly a large lightning bolt hit the blade. It glowed brightly and Thales thrusted it down and strings of racing lightning hit in every direction simultaneous. It hit Zoe and she screamed, but then she hit a tree. With a shaky hand holding the tree for support, Zoe got up, but it was not meant to be, because she fell back again. She had to shut her eyes in pain and groaned because she could not move. When she opened her eyes, the electric sword was deactivated and Thales put it in her pocket. The owner was a grinning Thales. Thales smiled and said, "Good fight Nightshade, but you're still not strong enough to take me down." After a few minutes, Thales lifted her hand to the fallen hunter who grasped it shakingly. Zoe nodded her head, and with that a yell came out. Campers win for the first time in 55 games. Artemis looked shocked but then grinned and thought, we will hopeful win next time, but I will need to level up the training for the hunters. Zoe and other hunters shivered and then gulped in fear. Their eyes went to their mistress, who had a sweet grin on her breathtaking face that had the hunters suddenly turned pale like a ghost and silently whimpering like hurt puppies. Zoe thanked her for helping her out of the woods and walked to the group of defeated pale whimpering hunters. After all the hunters came together as one group, it was decided that they needed some new plans to get the flag. The hunters were going to Cabin 8 to get away from the men and create new strategies for the next they face the campers once more. Thalz on the other hand grinned at Zoe and thought, just wait until Zoe comes. Before walking away with a smirk on her face. When the hunters reached Cabin 8, Artemis was there waiting by the door and said, Phoebe and Zoe, we need to go to Olympus for the reading after the campfire. Artemis asked if the hunters wanted to go to the campfire or stay in the cabin. The hunters discussed it a bit and Zoe said, Milady, thee and thy sisters would stay in the cabin. Artemis nodded her head but turned to Talia and said, Annabeth wants you to come. Talia sighed but nodded her head and walked up to Artemis, who just nodded her head. The other hunters waved to their mistress and she smiled, then flashed out of the cabin to the campfire. Zoe and Phoebe talked to the hunters for a couple of hours, but sadly it was time to go and Artemis flashed to the door with Talia. So Phoebe and Zoe smiled sadly but waved goodbye to their fellow hunters and then walked to Artemis. Artemis smiled at two of her oldest hunters. Zoe and Phoebe were like her true daughters. She dreaded the thought what she would do if one of them died. With the demigods, Talia groaned in annoyance because Percy and Nico, like true cousins, had to rub it in her face about losing to the campers. Thalz just raised her eyebrows and thought, do I really act that way? Chiron shouted to the campers, we are going to have a campfire soon. But then turned to Artemis and questioned, does the hunters want to come? Artemis shrugged her shoulders and said, properly not, because they will be males in the group, but maybe Talia would. Chiron just nodded his head and galloped away to the campfire. Talia was flashed by Artemis to the edge of the clearing. Because little Annabeth wanted her, so she came, and then little Annabeth jumped up and was forced dragged by an excited little Annabeth to sit right next to her. Little Annabeth grinned happily, then hugged Talia, who was surprised at first but then smiled and hugged her back. The campfire was 20 feet high with golden flames flaring high in the night sky. The future demigods and all the gods and goddesses announced that they were going to leave. Little Annabeth launched herself at Thalz and whimpered out, I don't want you to go, Talia. Thalz just gave a sad smile and said, don't worry, I will always live in here. Thalz was pointing to her heart. Little Annabeth sniffed but nodded her head and left to go back to the campers. Thalz turned her head to little Annabeth, then smiled and said, I will be back on the next break, okay Annie? Little Annabeth just smiled and nodded her head excitedly at the fact Talia would come over soon. As the group of demigods were transported to Olympus once again, Zeus said, everyone may go to their rooms to rest, for tomorrow we start the reading again. Hermes and Apollo said, wake up at 7 o'clock or else the room surprise we installed will wake you up.